Hi, welcome to Monash Connections for Change. We're really excited to have Ben Crowe with us today for a live Q&A session. Ben's a Monash Arts graduate who's one of the world's most in-demand mentors and mindset coaches, working with the likes of world tennis champion Ash Barty, Richmond Football Club captain Trent Cotchin, and world champion surfer Stephanie Gilmore. He's also the director of Mojo Crow. Ben was a popular speaker at our networkathon last year, where he presented on the power of authentic connection and positive mindset to drive personal and professional performance. We're delighted to have Ben back to share his top tips and answer questions from the alumni community on how to manage through COVID-19. Welcome, Ben.
Thank you, Joe. Thanks for the invite. Lovely to be here. Kind of be here anyway.
Great to have you. So let's start with the basics. Why is mindset so important, particularly in this current climate?
Quite simply, confidence comes from two places, Joe. There's only two levers that anyone on the planet has access to determine our confidence levels. One is training or studying, muscle memory, skill acquisition, those kind of things. And the second one is mindset. They're really the only two levers that any of us have access to. Unfortunately, most people believe that confidence comes from results, which means when we're winning, confidence is high. When we're losing, confidence tanks. But it's a false economy because we can't control results. We can't control what's on the exam. We can't control competitors. We can't control market forces, as the whole world's realizing that right now. So getting back to focusing on the things we can control, which is training and mindset, is pretty important. Now, the current climate's pretty crazy. So acknowledging you can't control the conditions of our world, but we can control the decisions in our world. Our mind is like a muscle, and it gets stronger and stronger and stronger, just like our bicep. Once we realize we're in total control of training that muscle, everyone in the world lives and dies on the success of three things: how we think, what we prioritize, and the decisions that we make. Acknowledging that we can control how we think, therefore what we prioritize, and the decisions that we make. At the moment, the opposite is happening. We're letting the conditions of our reality determine our mindset, determine our attitude, and determine our self-worth, which basically means if it's rainy, I'll feel crappy, and if it's sunny, I'll feel happy, which is crazy, right? It's abdicating responsibility and the ability to choose our response in any situation and conditions around us. But once we realize that we're in total control of our emotions, we're in total control of the words we send from our conscious mind to our unconscious mind that determines those emotions. Now, there's 7.5 billion people on the planet today, and less than 0.00001% of the entire world population actually know this fact, that we're in total control of our emotions. So if you're feeling calm, it's physically, medically, scientifically impossible to feel anxious at the same time. But the opposite is also true. If you feel anxious, it's impossible to feel calm. Once we realize that, we realize, well, it's actually our decisions, not the conditions, that determine this. We decide. And the way to do that is to go back and take ownership of your mindset, is to go back and reclaim a performance, any performance from primary school or secondary school, giving a talk, giving a debate, any performance when you felt you were absolutely in the zone, you were at your best, you felt kind of unstoppable. And if you go back to that performance and you write down the words that best describes how you were feeling in that performance, I guarantee you'll find derivatives of calm, confident, relaxed, free, happy. And these words represent the best version of you. And practicing those words and hanging on to that memory is the substitute to getting distracted at the moment by things we can't control or catastrophizing the end result. 99% of performances are sabotaged by those two things. And at the moment, there are so many distractions created by the uncertainty of COVID that's sabotaging our mindset and our performances, or we're catastrophizing the end result. When will this end? How much money will I lose? How many people will be killed? Will we find a vaccine? Will my family be okay? And it's okay to have those as considerations, but when they become the focus of your attention, we get distracted. Now, a core part of the mindset principle of performance is accepting the things we can't control and focusing back on the things we can control and the best version of ourselves. Now, we've just created the best version of ourselves. So it's really important to identify what's my flavor of distraction right now. Where am I focusing my attention on things I can't control? So I can accept those and let them go. If we don't understand how powerful acceptance is, we'll end up focusing on something we can't control. And focusing on something we can't control but wanting to control it is effectively the definition of anxiety, the definition of stress or pressure or worry. So kind of realizing that we're in total control of this is literally life-altering for many people. So Viktor Frankl, one of my heroes, and arguably the world's greatest psychiatrist, who survived the Auschwitz concentration camp, he got out and he wrote arguably one of the world's most powerful books called Man's Search for Meaning. It's the book that I've been gifting the most through this pandemic. And in that book, the most famous line is, everything can be taken from a person except for one thing, the last of the human freedoms, to choose one's attitude in any set of circumstances, to choose one's own way. Once we realize we don't have the power to control the conditions, we have the power to change ourselves. And there was a beautiful quote I saw yesterday, which said, you can't control the waves, but you can learn to surf. And it's ability to understand the things we can control and we can't control, so we can separate the two and not get distracted at the moment. It's the big learning I've probably had in the last 2 months, is we really struggle with uncertainty, and therefore we really struggle with vulnerability as a consequence of
that. So you often talk about the need to own your story. How important is that, to own your story?
Yeah, great question. Owning your story effectively means owning your self-worth, and owning that self-worth unconditionally. It's not conditional upon what grades you get or what you look like or your financial status. There's no external validation that will ever overcompensate or replace our self-worth. We can only find that from within. Yeah. So owning our story is really about accepting that we're imperfect, as everyone on the planet is, and full of struggle and don't have all the answers, and we're a little bit scared. But we're also unconditionally worthy of love, of belonging, of connection, of going on a journey to extract whatever God-given gifts we've been given. And if you can hold those two thoughts together at the same time, I'm imperfect, and it's imperfections that connect humans the most, the nuances, the idiosyncrasies, the in-jokes, the laughter, the tears, the stories, that's the gold. If you can hang on and celebrate our imperfections and also celebrate our unconditional self-worth, you're kind of bulletproof. You've got all the power in the world. But until you do that, you lose your power, because you're constantly worrying what people are thinking about you or saying about you, and you try and be that person. As soon as you do that, you go from knowing that you authentically belong to trying to fit in. And as soon as you try and fit into the crowd or fit into a certain situation, you lose the only competitive advantage that you have, which is your authenticity, right? Because there's only one Joe. So taking back ownership of our story is so important, because then we stop craving recognition. We stop caring what people think about us, and it's more about what you think about yourself. You've got the courage to be disliked. You don't want to be disliked, but you've got the courage to be disliked, the courage to get up when you fall down. You've got the resilience to go after your goals and dreams. And the way to do that, Joe, is effectively to embrace vulnerability as a strength. There's effectively two types of people on the planet today, two types of students, two types of parents, two types of coaches, two types of captains. Those who see vulnerability as a strength, and those who view it as a weakness. And if you view vulnerability as a weakness, typically three things happen. You're quite closed, kind of closed-minded, you're defensive, you're on the back foot, feeling like you're being attacked. You're not very compassionate, first for yourself, because you think you have to be this perfect specimen, so you put on that mask and that armor for self-preservation purposes, because I don't want you to know that I'm not perfect, so you're never going to see the real Ben Crowe. And if I'm not compassionate for myself, I'm not going to be compassionate for anyone else, because you kind of got to put that oxygen mask on yourself first before you fit it onto someone else. And therefore, I'm not going to create that connection that as humans we're hardwired for. Yeah. But if you view vulnerability as a strength and you lean into the risk and the uncertainty and the emotional exposure that goes with putting yourself out there, the opposite three things happen. We're more open, open-minded, curious, creative, innovative, whatever word you want to use, right? We're incredibly compassionate, first for ourselves and then for others. And I'd argue that's the number one issue on the planet right now, all over the world. We have to be kinder to ourselves first. We've got to cut ourselves some slack, give ourselves a break, and have a little bit more self-acceptance, self-worth, self-love, self-compassion, whatever word you want to say. We just got to be kinder to ourselves first. Then we can be compassionate to others, and then we can create that beautiful connection. Now, when you wake up in the morning, if you don't take ownership of who you are and believe that you're unconditionally worthy, and you show your head up in the world, the three biggest storytellers in the world will try and tell you who you are. And the three biggest storytellers in the world right now is the media industry, the social media industry, and the advertising industry. Now, the media industry is predicated on negativity, in particular news media. Yeah, it's a formula. So you watch tonight's news, 72% of the stories will be negative. Yeah, but we've also got this reptilian brain, this negative bias designed to protect us. So that's why we're all feeling so negative at the moment if we pick up our phone first thing in the morning and check news media. The second one is social media, and that was predicated on self and comparing ourselves and craving recognition and acknowledgement. Someone please acknowledge me. How many likes have I got? How many friends have I got? And creating that FOMO, fear of missing out. And it's exacerbating the perfection myth, in particular on Instagram, in particular for young girls. The third and most powerful storyteller of all is the advertising industry, and that's predicated on shame, that you're not enough until you buy that car or that handbag or that watch. And the advertising industry was never designed to do that. It was designed to promote attributes and benefits of products, but it's got so clever in its psychology that that's now how it's. So if you get distracted by those three big storytellers trying to tell you who you are, you're not going to be feeling too great about yourself, which is why it's so important to take ownership back of our story. And because we are the stories we tell ourselves about ourselves, if you like. So taking ownership of that is just so important.
Some really useful tips there. Thank you. So we've had a question come in from Jeremy, which I think is a really interesting one. He's asking, how do you perform beyond the plateau that your mind sets for you? How do you, when you think you're only capable of a certain level, how do you break through that mindset to push yourself further?
Yeah, it's kind of separating goals from expectations. Right? If you put expectations on yourself, you'll cap your potential, if you like. The whole goal is to kind of uncap it and set our goals and dreams and set them as big and far as you can possibly take them. As long as you know that there's no guarantees, there's no expectation that you'll achieve those goals, yeah, that's called living. And we're all caught up in that same perspective. So what's really important is the distinguishing between the goals and dreams I set for myself and making sure they don't become expectations. And they certainly don't become, you don't listen to the expectations of others, because that'll just put unnecessary pressure on yourself as well, because I can't control what you expect of me. I can't control what you think about me. All I can control is the expectations I put on myself. And as long as getting back to confidence, as long as I train hard and focus on my mindset. So Ash Barty gets asked all the time, how is she dealing with the pressure? And she goes, what pressure? And then they go, well, how are you dealing with the expectations? She goes, what expectations? One of myself. And they'll go, no, the expectations of the whole world. She goes, well, listen, dude, I can't control what your expectations are of me. I can't control what you think about me. All I can control is the expectations I put on myself. And as long as I work my ring off, which is her vernacular for training hard, and give it a crack, which is her vernacular for focusing on her mindset, they're the only expectations she can put on herself. And then there's no pressure, right? And then she can go out and perform and stay light rather than go all tight when we think there's all these unnecessary expectations.
That's some great advice. So on that theme, what advice have you got to help us kind of hold on to these strategies and support ourselves and remember this going forward? I know you've got two sons at Monash University at the moment, and university is all a bit of a struggle for students. How are you sort of helping keep them motivated and resilient and, you know, in the face of this sort of all this change?
Yeah, totally. Well, in the spirit of owning your story, the best advice I can give people is to create affirmations or mantras. It's in the spirit of our decisions, not the conditions. We are the stories we tell ourselves about ourselves. And words are just verbalized thoughts. Yeah. So creating mantras that represent the best version of us. Now, a mantra could be as simple as, I'm a warrior, not a worrier, or I'm imperfect, but I am worthy, or I'm enough. Last year, I traveled the world and did exercises with 500 CEOs in Moscow, 1,000 CEOs in New York, and worked with teenagers in Australia. And the overwhelming mantra or affirmation that people created was, I've got this. Yeah, I've got this. I can do this. I can get through this. And one way to develop mantras, so you've already created your A game words, right? You've created the best version of you in terms of performances. The way to create mantras and affirmations for ourselves is answer two questions first and foremost. One is, how do I experience fear? Right? How do I show up when I'm afraid? Do I go to silence? Do I go to violence? Do I go to fight? Do I go to flight? Do I get all scared, or do I overcompensate and start name dropping and talking about myself and trying to control the situation? Once you answer that question, then you can answer the second one. When does that occur? In which situations or experiences or relationships do I do that? When I walk into a room and I tell myself that I'm not enough and I need to overcompensate, or when I feel like I'm losing control of a certain situation or relationship. So it's really important to understand how I experience fear and when that occurs. Once you can identify those two things, the next one is, well, next time that happens, what can I say to myself in real time that will enable me to stand my ground, and stand tall rather than go small? And that becomes how you show up in a certain situation when you experience fear. Most of us in any condition tell ourselves one of two stories. Either I'm enough or I'm not enough. And if most of us experience fear, we're telling ourselves a story that I'm not good enough, not smart enough, I'm not liked enough, I'm not loved enough, whatever it is. And when that happens, we're creating these vertical relationships where we're putting ourselves below others, which at the extreme is an inferiority complex, or we put ourselves above others, which at its extreme is a superiority complex, as opposed to, everyone on the planet is equal. Yeah, horizontal relationships. We're different, but we are equal. Fundamentally, everyone on the planet is equal. And if you say to yourself in that next time you experience that fear in that situation, you say to yourself, I got this. I am worthy to be here. I'm worthy of love. I'm worthy of belonging. Eventually, you'll find a series of affirmations and mantras that you can use, and you start to catch yourself in real time. Yeah, and it just alters your perspective, if you like. The other two pillars that are really powerful for altering our perspective is acceptance and gratitude. Yeah, accepting that life is difficult means it's no longer difficult, and just practicing gratitude every day, in particular in the morning. If you win the morning, you win the day. So if you can practice like gratitude manifesto, which is simple as I'm so grateful and thankful for ... And then whatever comes in your head in that moment, that's what you're grateful for. And it's not the actual activity, it's the act of being grateful. Again, you can be grateful for the fact that you got to sleep in a bed, or you got to have a hot shower, or you got to have a breakfast. 2/3 of the world don't get to do those three things. So it can be materialistic. It can be about family. The fact that we live in Australia and not some other part of the world that's struggling a lot worse than us. But when we practice gratitude, appreciation, thankfulness, just feeling lucky, it removes any sense of pressure and expectation and entitlement that's really affecting us right now with the unnecessary pressure that we're putting on ourselves.
An interesting question here from Nicholas, who wants to know whether a leader, or how a leader of an organisation can embrace vulnerability without causing sort of uncertainty and potentially panic among employees of the organisation.
Yeah. Really important that leaders are open and honest to the principles of vulnerability, and not sugarcoating things. But if you say to yourself and to the team, life is imperfect right now, let's admit it, right? Let's acknowledge it. Things aren't easy. But we are together worthy of getting through this from a perspective point of view. Yeah. Our greatest growth comes from our darkest times, because as long as we lean in, we don't lean back, right? Embracing the lean into the risk and the uncertainty, the emotional exposure with, yes, this is hard, acknowledge that, and acknowledging that, being honest with that creates a sense of humility and humanity and empathy and togetherness. We'll get through this. It's really important to finish the sentence. if you acknowledge that you're imperfect, which we are, or the world is imperfect, which it is, it's also important to acknowledge that you are worthy of being the leader and taking your people on a journey. So when Trent Cotchin got up in the start of 2017, an AFL captain, and said to his whole team, I'm so sorry, I thought I had to be the perfect captain for the last 7 years. And I'm here to tell you that I'm not. I'm imperfect and I'm full of struggle and I don't have all the answers and I can't do this on my own. But I'm also here to tell you that I'm worthy of your love, of your belonging, of connection, of taking you on a journey to extract whatever God-given gifts we've been given as a team, yeah? And they went from being, unofficially the worst team or the worst captain to officially the best team and the best captain because he lent in, he embraced the principles of vulnerability, right? And realizing that your job as a leader is not to have the answer. Your job is to create an environment for others to be successful, for others to have the answer. So don't put that pressure on yourself as a leader, right? But if you lean into uncertainty and risk and emotional exposure, but give yourself permission to be worthy of that, and you share that, and that creates the culture of the organization. The original definition of courage, before it became more masculine and physical in its orientation, courage comes from the Latin word cor, which means heart. And the original definition of courage was to tell the story of who you are with your whole heart. So as a leader, if you take off that mask and take off that armor and just let yourself be seen, truly seen, vulnerably seen, you go behind the scenes, you draw the stories behind the stories of who you are, yeah, because you've owned your story. When you do that, you create a connection on a human level, not on a transactional level of whatever industry you're working in as a leader, but on a human level. And when you do that, it creates the most extraordinary connection that in industry can become competitive advantage because your competitors can't see it, so therefore they can't defend against connection. So it's really, really powerful. Unfortunately, these principles, Joe, are counterintuitive to terms of how we think today as leaders. What do you mean embrace vulnerability? What do you mean celebrate imperfection? What do you mean tell stories? Unfortunately, it's all very serious and very mask perfection orientated, if you like. So it's about, I guess, dispelling some of those myths amongst your culture.
Definitely true in a lot of workplaces, I think. Another couple of interesting questions have come in about transmitting those mantras and these things that you, strategies that you can use within yourself. How do you use those to transmit those to others if your loved ones are struggling? How can you use those strategies to help them as well?
Yeah. Helping your loved ones or helping your employees or helping your kids understand the things they can't control. Identify the things they can't control, but they might be focusing their attention on those things causing anxiety or stress or pressure, and helping them focus their attention back on the things they can control and start really small like that. Then if you also help them develop the best version of themselves, find a playful performance when they're at their best, and find their A-game words, find their version of calm or confident or strong or focused, and get them practicing those, get them creating habits, if you like. At the moment, certainty and routine have been replaced by uncertainty, risk and emotional exposure. So helping them create mindset habits and other routines that these mantras and affirmations can show up in will start to redirect the stories that we tell ourselves, that we're not good enough, that we're not worthy, or we're focusing things that we can't control. So it is hard to do on our own sometimes. So having a mentor that we can bounce stuff off. And again, if you embrace vulnerability, you'll be open to having those conversations, because if you're in your head, you're dead. So getting this stuff out of your head and finding a friend or a parent or someone we can share these stories with safety and permission to normalize these conversations. So we're not caught up in perfectionism and fear. And so creating that safety to have those conversations and acknowledge yourself, how you're struggling and what habits you're creating in order to create those positive mantras.
It's these are really practical strategies, and it seems to me that they would apply to people no matter what their age is, younger kids, no matter what. Is there somewhere people can go and access more information, more content from you, more, some strategies that they can use?
Good question. I've been asked a few times if I'm writing a book. The reason I haven't is that I figure you write a book when you've got the answers, and I'm still formulating the questions. for the answers. I am creating an app, however. So on Mojo Crow, all the socials and LinkedIn's and so forth, if you go on that, you'll find a lot of material. As far as other readings go, beyond the Mojo Crow world, the two most successful and watched videos on the planet on TED.com is from Brené Brown's The Power of Vulnerability and Simon Sinek's Start With Why, which is all around having a purpose mindset. So this isn't Ben Crowe's Sermon on the Mount. You know, 1 billion people are watching these videos, right? So the whole world is craving this ability to take off our mask and just let ourselves be seen, yeah? But also develop a sense of purpose and meaning and fulfillment and contribution beyond ourselves. Because when we're obsessing ourselves, we're suffering because we're hardwired for connection to others. So, as I mentioned, Man's Search for Meaning, anything written by Viktor Frankl, anything written by Brené Brown, Simon Sinek, some of these kind of reference points are really, really powerful. And then, when the app's ready, I'll unleash that on the world and hopefully provide a bit more actual tangible materials, in particular for university students or young athletes, about how they can get through this. But typically the three mindsets are purpose mindset, which is about, are you just here to show up, get a degree, get a job and make a lot of money, or fundamentally you stand for something, you believe in something, there's something that lights you up. That's purpose mindset, contributing to something or someone beyond ourselves. The second one is connection mindset, which is really connecting with ourselves first and that unconditional self-worth, and creating that inner confidence that you can then project onto others and connecting with others. And the third one is performance mindset, which we discussed at the start, Joe, finding the best version of ourselves and then accepting the things we can't control and focusing back on the things we can. These principles, as you said, they're simple, but they're not easy. And most of us don't practice them. And we practice things that we can see externally. But once we realize that we're in total control of our mind and our mindset, and we practice those, your mindset can become a competitive advantage for you in terms of how you show up against your competitive set.
I mean, it clearly works. Stephanie Gilmore, Ash Barty, Richmond. So, these tips from you today have just been incredible, and I can't thank you enough for taking the time to answer these questions from the Monash alumni. I've also got some exciting news for our viewers today. Ben has kindly agreed to give away a one-on-one mentoring session. Now, this isn't the kind of thing just anyone can access. It's an exclusive opportunity available to one lucky alumni to ask your own individual questions. We'll send out some more details via email about this. And in the meantime, make sure you join the official Monash Alumni LinkedIn group to stay across Connections for Change and to access a copy of the webinar. Thank you all for coming, and thank you so much, Ben, for your time and for sharing such fantastic strategies with all of us. Really appreciate it.
My pleasure, Joe. I'm a big fan of Monash Uni, and good luck to everyone.
Thanks again.